We're actually going to be looking at chapter 8, the first 17 verses, but this is a summary of what we'll be seeing there. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and affliction. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like a sheep without a shepherd. This is the word of the Lord. You can be seated. And so this morning, we are actually transitioning into this new section in our study through the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel according to Matthew. So we'll be spending most of our time in chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. But like I said, that passage at the end of chapter 9 there more or less serves as a summary of where we're going to be for the next couple of weeks. So if you remember, this is a biography of Jesus that we are walking through. We've been in the Sermon on the Mount for so long, but as we come out of it, we remember that we are in this broader biography that Matthew is recording to us, a biography of Jesus. And so for better or worse, the way that we experience stories or biographies is oftentimes through movies today. And so just think for a minute some of the tools that filmmakers use in order to communicate their stories or their messages. So usually there's some sort of like immersive introduction, an opening scene where we're being introduced to a whole new world, right? There are new characters. We're learning people's names. We're learning relationships. We're learning where we are. You're in this section of the movie, or you know you're in this section of the movie when the person, the people that talk during movies, they're always like, who is that person? What was their name again? Where are they going? Who are they? Why are they there? Where are we? You're learning all of this new world all in one kind of setting. Another tool that filmmakers or storytellers will use is to use long dialogue or explanation. So there's like a really important conversation that happens, or someone basically will explain the whole plot of what's going on. You're in that section of the movie where it's like, wait, what did that guy say? This is important. Go back. Rewind it 15 seconds. Put the subtitles on. We can't miss what's going on here. This is the subtitle section of the movie. Another tool that movie makers will use are montages. A good montage is really hard to beat. A montage has a lot of scenes, a lot of visuals, and they're all spliced together, usually with some great song in the background or something. Minimal dialogue, but lots of action, and the action does the talking. So the great example of this is the cinematic masterpiece Rocky IV. Rocky IV is a crisp 91 minutes, and 32% of that movie is montage. Yes. It's montage of training, montage of driving, montage of fighting, montages of thinking, literally, montages of thinking during that movie. Masterfully done. And so, we talk about montages, and really this is the section that we are going into. If you think back to some of these dynamics, Matthew's been using a couple of these tools. So in chapters 1 through 4, we're being introduced to this world in which Jesus is born into. We're introduced to all sorts of new characters: Joseph, Mary, Herod, Magi, John the Baptist. We're introduced into this world, and you remember that Matthew says, I'm writing this Genesis. I'm writing this new beginning, the Genesis of Jesus Christ, and we're learning who Jesus is. He's the Messiah. He's the son of David. He's the son of Abraham. The Father opens up the skies at his baptism and says, this is my Son who I'm well pleased. We see the Spirit descending on Jesus as a dove. Jesus goes out and encounters the Satan and resists his temptation. We're learning all sorts of new characters, and we're getting oriented into this world that Jesus enters into. We then transitioned into this long period of exposition or explanation, a long speech by Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew is building this identity of Jesus, and one of the tools he uses is literally this speech where Jesus tells us what is important to him. Jesus tells us very clearly the type of behavior that is expected and appropriate for the kingdom of heaven. And so this is the part in that, going back to the movie thing, this is like where you turn on the subtitles. And you're like, wait, Jesus said what? The good life belongs to who? The good life belongs to the poor in spirit? The good life belongs to the persecuted? No, I must not have heard that correctly. Go back, turn on the subtitles. I don't want to miss what he says. If I am angry, then I'm guilty of murder. Go back, repeat that. What did he actually say? And so Jesus, we see in his speech, is concerned with this greater righteousness. He speaks with authority beyond any of the religious leaders of the day. And he tells us that he's come to fulfill, not put away, but to fulfill all the law and the prophets. In this speech, we learn what is important to Jesus. So we come to chapter 8, and you see the very first line of chapter 8. When he comes down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and all of a sudden, now we're into this montage. What's going to happen over the next 2 chapters is we're going to see a wave of activity. A wave of miracles from Jesus. 10 miracles, in fact, over these next 2 chapters. Miracle after miracle after miracle stacked on top of each other, coming at us like a wave. And so in reality, we see that we're entering into more of a fast-paced, moving period of this biography of Jesus. And again, we read the summary that Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, and he was teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, healing every disease and every affliction. And he saw the crowds. He had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like a sheep without a shepherd. You can almost hear some sick song playing in the background as Jesus is just walking around, healing literally everybody. And so what do we see in this section as we enter into this montage? Our approach is going to be pretty simple, is I just want us to sift through this story together. Just kind of experience what is being recorded in this story. We're going to make some observations along the way, and then we'll draw some conclusions at the end. And so first off, we see in chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, that Jesus heals the leper. Jesus says, I am willing, be clean. So I'm going to read chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. This records the first wave miracle that we'll see here. And so Jesus, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. So a leper comes to Jesus. And so you might not be well-versed on cleanliness laws, Levitical cleanliness laws, but Matthew kind of assumes that you are. And so here's what you need to know. You need to know that a leper coming to Jesus or a leper approaching anyone is not a normal situation. It's more of a startling situation. That's why you even see the word behold. This is a surprising encounter that Jesus finds himself in. This man is a leper, meaning he has leprosy, which is like a broad term for skin diseases. And these skin diseases were thought to be highly contagious. They were certainly embarrassing, and they were certainly painful. And so if you had a disease like this, if you had leprosy, you were identified as unclean. And it didn't mean that you were literally dirty or had bad hygiene. You could have amazing hygiene and still be unclean. It's more of a status. It's more of a technical term. And so this man was unclean, meaning he had the skin disease. And so for him to approach Jesus or for him to approach anyone is really out of the norm. It would have been an uncomfortable situation. So in Numbers chapter 5 or Leviticus 13 and 14, you can read all sorts of details about what made a person unclean and what they needed to do in order to be made clean so that they could enter back into the camp, enter back into the community. So some of the things that would make you unclean would be if you touched a dead body. So if you had a family member die and you buried them, that would make you unclean. If you had a bodily discharge, that would make you unclean. And if you had a skin disease, that would make you unclean. These are not like sinful, wrong realities. These are simply the realities of life and death. Sometimes in the flow of life, you would become unclean. And when you did, you were to be removed from the camp and then be made clean and be brought back into the camp. And so when you were unclean, being outside of the camp means you're separated from a couple of really important things in that day and age. You're separated from God's people and you're separated from God's presence. Remember how things were established there with the tabernacle and the temple. You know, the presence of God dwelled in the midst of his people. And so if you were unclean, you couldn't be there. You were outside and you needed to experience some ritual cleansing in order to be brought back into the presence of God. So in this unexpected encounter, we're seeing like some law dynamics, some story of God dynamics. This isn't a simple story of Jesus healing a sick person. This is a complex story, a powerful story of Jesus doing something with the Old Testament law, fulfilling the Old Testament law in such a way that no one else has been able to do before. And so Jesus is unconcerned by this unclean man approaching him. And notice what the leper says. He says, "Lord," while kneeling, by the way. He says, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." You know, that's a really interesting way to say that, right? He doesn't say, "If you are able, will you heal me?" He says, "If you are willing," not able, "will you make me clean?" Not heal me. He doesn't question Jesus' ability. He questions his goodness. He doesn't seek relief alone. He wants restoration and inclusion. He wants to be made clean again. And so we know Jesus is able. He seems to know Jesus is able. He's authoritative. But is he merciful? Will he do to others what he would wish others do to him? The very thing that he just got done saying. We don't really know at this point. It seems like Jesus would act this way. But if you're willing, will you make me clean? And this, by the way, is such a great example of something to say to Jesus when you first come to him. You know, as you are raising your little ones and you are introducing Jesus to them, you know, what an amazing sentence to say to Jesus upon being introduced to him. "Lord, if you are willing, will you make me clean? Will you bring me into your presence?" You know, by the way, we can all relate to the leper coming off of the Sermon on the Mount, right? Feeling the weight of greater righteousness. Did you experience any conviction? Did you experience any falling short? Did you experience any challenges when you looked inside your own heart and that maybe I saw some anger, maybe I saw some lust, maybe I saw some judgment? You know, "Lord, if you are willing, I know I'm unclean. Will you make me clean?" Jesus' response here is amazing. Of course, he stretches out his hand and touches the leper. That's not what was supposed to happen, of course. Here's how it's supposed to work. You know, you reach out and touch someone who is unclean, and you now are unclean. Now you are contaminated. Now you are outside of the camp. Now you are separated from God's presence. But Jesus does not become unclean. Jesus is bringing about a new beginning, a new reality. He's literally creating a new world from within. And so there's a new normal that's being initiated here. A new world is being created. Jesus is the dwelling place of God. And when he comes in contact with that which is unclean, not only does he remain unaffected, he remains clean, but he actually makes clean the unclean that comes into contact with him. You follow all that? And so there is a contagious holiness to Jesus, whereas uncleanliness, sin, destruction, brokenness, these are the things that are contagious under the law. And we must be made clean in order to be brought into God's presence. Here with Jesus, we see a contagious holiness, a contagious cleanliness, as Jesus, as the presence of God, literally going around infecting the world with righteousness, infecting a dark world with light. So Jesus touches this man. It's like the gospel's already done simply by Jesus touching this man. He then follows up to say, I am willing. You asked if I was willing. I am willing. Be clean. Of course it pleases me, Jesus says. You are restored. And so as we sit and as we hear these words of Jesus, we put ourselves in the story. As we come to him, Lord, if you are willing, make me clean, we should hear, I am willing. Jesus is telling us, I am willing. As we approach him in humility, asking for cleanliness, Jesus says, I'm willing. Be clean, be restored. Note the authority and kindness of Jesus here. History is full of all sorts of people with great authority and great power. People with means, people with wisdom, people with power, people with influence, people with authority. But when you have that great authority, when you have that great power and influence, but you aren't willing as well, you are of no use to society. But Jesus is the one who comes to transform society because he is not only authority, he's not only able, but he's also willing. He's also gracious. And so what is required of the one who will redeem all of humanity? He must be able and he must be willing. What is required of the one who will shepherd his people and lay down his life for them? He must be willing and he must be able. And so we see this in this simple story, and it ends very modestly. The story ends very modestly where Jesus says, don't tell anyone except for the priest. And he's doing this just to simply, keep the peace here. He's telling, tell no one except the priest, so that peace may be maintained and ministry can continue. But still, I'm not coming to abolish the law. So go through that process. Go make this known to the priest and be restored to the camp. And so it's a very Jewish law thing that Jesus is doing here by making this man clean and bringing him back into the camp. So that's our first little vignette. Jesus heals the leper. And we need to hear, I am willing, Jesus says, be made clean. The second vignette is in verses 5 through 13. So I'll read this story now. This is a much different story and yet basically identical. When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him and appealing to him says, Lord, my servant laying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I will say to one, go, and he goes, and I will say to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. And Jesus, when he heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you that with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from the east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion, Jesus said, go, let it be done for you, and as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. And so the second scene, a centurion comes and pleads his case. My servant, he says, is paralyzed, is sick. He's in agony. This word servant is a weird one. It's not a normal word for servant. It's kind of a unique word. Many people speculate this was the man's son who was also serving under him. I'm going to call this person the centurion's son from here on out. but we have a much different case that is going on here. A much different case. Here we have a Gentile, so not a Jew, and a person of great authority, as opposed to an outcast. A Jewish isolated leper, and then a Gentile man in authority. And the man simply comes and states his position. He states the condition of the man who is at home, paralyzed and in agony. And Jesus quickly states his intention to come and help. But here's where the story gets a little weird, or kind of takes a little bit of a turn, is the centurion, almost in a sense, kind of backtracks a little bit, but really in a demonstration of humility. I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. And then he kind of says, I know how this whole thing goes with people in authority. I have soldiers under me, and I give orders, and they come and they go. And, Jesus, you are doing the same. So simply, if you say the word, this can happen. But I'm not worthy for you to come and take this time and do this. And so it's an expression of humility and also kind of an understanding of who Jesus is and how he operates. But look again at verse 9. He says a very interesting thing. The centurion says to Jesus, "For I too, I also am a man not with authority, but I am a man under authority." So what is he saying here? The centurion is saying, I, like you, Jesus, am under authority, which means I also have some measure of authority. I know what it means to be under authority and then to have that authority give me authority over others. Jesus, I recognize that we're kind of like in a similar position here, only in completely different matters. And so what's the significance of this? Well, it means that I think the centurion is making an important observation here about Jesus. The centurion doesn't just think Jesus is like some sorcerer or magician or some powerful prophet, but he recognizes that Jesus is actually the Son of God. That's what it means to be Jesus under authority. He's saying, I too, like you, am under authority. I recognize, Jesus, that you are under God the Father, which we've already heard proclaimed in the Gospel of Matthew as the Father proclaims Jesus to be his Son. Think about the words that Jesus says at the end of Matthew in the Great Commission, where Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth is given unto me. And so what the centurion is noticing here, he's not just noticing that Jesus is powerful, he's noticing the true identity of who Jesus is. Jesus, you are a man under authority from God, meaning that you have under your authority all the things that the Father has given you to rule and reign over. We know from other passages that the Father has given the Son authority to rule all things, put all things as subject under his feet. So a really interesting thing that the centurion notices here. And I think Jesus' response to the centurion confirms that observation, where he says he's not just pleased with the request, but he marvels at the request and says, of all my people, which you are not, no one has faith like you do. And I think what Jesus is saying is, my own people are questioning and even rejecting my identity as the Son of God. You see it. You've identified it. Great is your faith. And then Jesus goes on to describe this reality where many will come from other nations, from the east and the west. They will recline, they will fellowship, they will share a meal with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the fathers of the people of God. And while others come in, those who are local are sent out. And what Jesus is talking about here is this new reality where salvation is going to be extended to the ends of the earth. It's statements like this and teachings like this where the Gentiles are brought in and the people of God are judged. It's statements like this that is going to get Jesus in significant trouble with the religious leaders of the day. The new heavens and new earth are composed of all nations and all peoples on the basis of faith. Jesus then references hell, where these folks are sent out to. We do not have much detail about what that place is from this specific passage, but for our case, simply very clear that Jesus is issuing a warning here, a warning to avoid this place, and we should always heed such a warning. So Jesus heals this man with his words. We've seen Jesus heal with a touch. By moving toward, we've seen Jesus speak his words and from a distance bring healing and relief. So these are the first two vignettes. The third one, you'll probably have to switch my slides there. The third one is really just a summary. We do have Peter's mother-in-law being healed. She's kind of singled out. But really, I think that we don't have many details about that situation. It's probably best to see it just in the summary where he's going. And all night, people are bringing to Jesus those who are oppressed, and Jesus is setting them free. Those who are sick, and Jesus is bringing healing. And so as we summarize, things that we see in these two longer stories and then in this summary, sort of this indication that Jesus is healing and setting people free all night, we make a couple of observations. First observation is that the outsider is very much in the focus of Jesus. I don't think it's any coincidence that immediately after recording Jesus' authority up on the mountain, as he speaks with authority, we see Jesus go down to help strugglers and outsiders. When Jesus is teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, he's teaching compassion. He's teaching do unto others as you would have them do to you. He's teaching love your enemies. He now literally practices what he preaches, immediately healing an outsider and healing a foreigner. Jesus is consistently moving toward and siding with those who are lacking in power, lacking in influence, lacking in status, and those who are hurting. Those values that are often despised by the world or ignored or passed over or unnoticed, Jesus leans into them, moves towards them, and shows them compassion. A leper, a Gentile, an older woman. Jewish women were not allowed as far in the temple as Jewish men. None of these would have been thought of in a position of power, influence, or value in the community. And Matthew frames it up that immediately after Jesus' powerful teaching, this is where Jesus goes first to demonstrate his compassion, his kindness, his mercy. They would all be allowed into the holy place of God. And so as Matthew is laying out this biography of Jesus, we're seeing the priorities of Jesus come into focus as we see him in action. Frederick Bruner, the commentator, says this. He says that the church, in response to seeing the actions of Jesus this way, the church must be both up on the mountain with the Lord receiving his word, and we must be down in the valley with human beings applying his work. Our response to seeing the healing focus of Jesus to outsiders is that we should be aware. We should be attentive. We should be compassionate toward those who are in need, toward those who are outside. Remembering the words of the Beatitudes, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And so this is our first call to action here as we see the actions of Jesus. May we who are being made into a new creation be agents of healing, aware, attentive, and compassionate toward those who are outside. Second thing is we want to make a couple of observations about what is even going on with this healing, right? I mean, healing is a powerful dynamic, and we all kind of have a category for it. And so why is Jesus healing here? Like, is Jesus just doing this in order for him to do, to pave the way for him to do something else that he really wants to do? You go to school and you learn algebra, and you want to be a physical therapist. You're like, why do I need to learn algebra in order to be a physical therapist? It's like, well, you don't, but you just do. Is that kind of the healing that Jesus is doing here? Is he just healing these people in order so that he can have the ground or the position to do what he really wants to do. That's not the case with Jesus. In Jesus' healing, we see a demonstration of his whole purpose for coming. In Jesus' healing, we're seeing salvation. Jesus demonstrates compassion on people in their suffering, and it's pointing to this deeper, this pervasive purpose that Jesus has come to do, namely to bring restoration, to bring salvation, to bring redemption to all of humanity. In his earthly ministry, Jesus mended those who were sick and healed those who were dying and freed those who were oppressed, as a picture, as a symbol of this greater reality that he is going to do for literally all of us who are in Christ. If you look back in chapter 8, verse 17, you see a familiar passage that is being identified here. He quotes from Isaiah 53. I'm going to read this broader section of Isaiah 53 that Matthew quotes from here. And we know this is like a familiar passage that is like a prophecy toward the death of Jesus. But notice here that Matthew links it up to the healing ministry of Jesus. Isaiah writes, "He was despised, rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one whom the people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." It's really informative that Matthew links that and says that Jesus went around healing everyone in order that he might fulfill that. The healing ministry of Jesus is connected to the dying and rising ministry of Jesus. It's not simply only speaking of his death, but what we're seeing in Jesus healing those who are sick and freeing those who are oppressed is we're seeing the saving work of Jesus, not only in his death and resurrection, but also in his entire life and ministry. These healings are pointers. They are pointers to these comprehensive, eternal, permanent realities of healing and restoration. And so, we all need to think about healing this way. We ask for healing, people who are sick, and sometimes the Lord heals and sometimes he doesn't. But for us, we are all facing our mortality, and for us all who are in Christ, every single one of us will literally be raised from the dead. That's the truth and reality of the gospel. And sometimes we can put that in some kind of other category. It's like, if real healing or real freedom doesn't happen, at least I'll get that. As if that weren't real. We will all be raised, literally raised from the dead to live forever, completely healed, completely restored in God's presence. And so I would encourage you, as this passage is about faith, to believe that reality, to bank your existence on that reality. I mean, notice some of the elements of faith that these characters in this story put forward for us. They respect the Lord, and they are confident. They're humble, and they ask boldly. And so the leper and the centurion are both acting this way. And there's no question that Jesus was operating, the times we read in are a distinct time. I mean, it seems like if you were sick in this time in Galilee, you were going to be healed. Like, no question about it. It seems like in this region, there was no sickness. There's no reality of this. Jesus is literally eradicating possession and sickness in this area. And we know this is a concentrated time. It doesn't mean that Jesus didn't do this before, or God didn't do this before. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't do it after. But no question, this is a concentrated time. And as we see Jesus move toward his death and resurrection, we're now entering into this new reality. I mean, think about the leper. The leper didn't know about the cross and the resurrection. He didn't have a category of, boy, I might be unclean now, and I might die unclean, but I'm guessing I'll be raised from the dead. He has no category for this. But we see literally Jesus die and rise and then clearly proclaim that all who are in him will be raised. Now we have new categories of redemption. Healing is a redemptive activity. When the Lord heals somebody, when we pray for healing and the Lord heals somebody, we look at that and we marvel and we say that points to Jesus' salvation. That points to his redemption. When we see people suffer, that's a redemptive activity. We see the suffering servant of God. We see Jesus himself literally suffering. And so both healing and redemption and suffering are both redemptive activities. And so we do so. We enter into faith. We pray for healing. We ask for it. But we do so under this confidence, knowing that some may be healed here and now, but all will be healed in that final day. Tyler Staton says it this way. He says, both healing and suffering are redemptive. Jesus was a miraculous healer, no question about it, but by far his most effective act of healing came by suffering and ultimately by dying on the cross. And so as we encounter these people that come to Jesus for healing, as we see their faith, may we lean into this faith as well. May we follow their example. May we have a faith that follows, that obeys, and that trusts the goodness and ability of the Savior. So I have a couple points of response to lead us into this time. These are simple prayer requests, and they're also statements of admission. So Lord, concerning this outsider focus that Jesus clearly had, Lord, make us attentive and compassionate toward the outsider. Think of who that might be in your life. Who is overlooked? Who is not part, who's not being highlighted in the story that if they were in Jesus' story, he would highlight, he would go to first. Number two, Lord, simply cause our faith to rise. Number three, Lord, because of the cross and resurrection, we believe that healing and suffering are redemptive. And so maybe you're in a position where you're praying for healing. Maybe you're in a position where you are experiencing suffering. Maybe you're kind of outside of that right now and you're looking at that reality in others. Have your mind and heart renewed that both of those realities are redemptive for those who are in Christ. And trust the final resurrection that comes at the day of his return. So we're going to have a period of response as we typically do. You can pray quietly. You can pray out loud. Just a couple of moments. And then we'll sing to conclude our time this morning.